This video is sponsored by the book summary service, Blinkist. The first 100 people to use the link in the description will receive 1 week for free and 25% off a full membership. Modern humanity had waited its entire life for this moment. One of the biggest questions, almost certainly pondered by just about every person across nearly every culture in every time and place of recent history, was now finally answered. Our crew was the one to make the discovery. In this moment, we became the first people of the first generation to realize with certainty that we are not alone. It was uncanny how similar they looked to us. Besides their clothing, the only things that were distinguishable were their widespread noses, thin, stretched lips, and short, somewhat flattened skulls with long brows. They almost looked like us if we just rewound the clock some million years or so to our earliest ancient human ancestors. There were various other species on the planet as well. Quite a bit of plant life, basic aquatic life, amoebas, bacteria, and a variety of other relatively small animals, all of which also look fairly similar to Earth-like species. Following some scanning tests and research, we concluded that all were relatively harmless, and only this one humanoid-like species appeared to have a higher, more complex form of consciousness. Originally, prior to the discovery, our group's mission was to scout and establish new interplanetary bases. We were one of the first large crews to travel out this far in this direction. We were primarily following up on probes we sent out to explore the resources and conditions of potentially habitable planets in order to begin the early developments of possible, further out, interplanetary societies. Upon the discovery of life in this humanoid-looking species on this particular, lesser-known planet though, the goal of the mission immediately became acquainting ourselves and forming positive relations with them. They clearly possessed some form of awareness and intelligence, operating within complex societies, speaking some sort of distinct languages, and appearing to function at a fairly high level of intelligence. And so, our objective was now to exchange knowledge, understanding, and resources, as well as further facilitate our initial endeavor of developing a planetary base on this clearly well-suited habitable planet. As part of my role in the group, it became my job to lead this endeavor and ensure safe contact, to maintain that no diseases were transmitted from them to us or us to them, and that there was no unnecessary hostility or violence. I was also to serve, at least initially, as the sole individual to communicate and interact with the species. We believed that this would be less threatening, help maintain consistent familiarity, and prevent it from appearing as though we were ambushing them. I contracted a collection of the finest linguists, anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists, and other scientists that we didn't already have on board. Positioned in our space station, just outside the planet's atmosphere, my team and I worked together via hologram conferences, developing plans and strategies to make the initial period of contact as seamless and non-threatening as possible. I then spent the following days introducing myself to the species. I was monitored in close proximity during all my interactions, a full defense security team ready at any moment to step in if anything went wrong. Surprisingly, the species didn't seem to take me as a threat at all. They seemed almost immediately happy to see me, like long-lost friends that reunited after many years apart. Initially, I thought this could be a strange subversion tactic. It was so surreal, but I soon found myself realizing it was simply the genuine purity and warmth of the species. They were so happy, an almost utopian-like perfect happiness. There was a bliss and love and connection in them that was unlike anything I had ever seen before. They welcomed me right in. Over the following weeks, I spent more and more time with and amongst them, jumping back and forth between their society and the space station. I researched and took notes, capturing audio recordings and footage of most of my interactions. At the end of each day, the team and I spent time assessing everything, evaluating the state of their civilization, the condition of their consciousness, the development of their technology, and so forth. In summary, they appeared to have strange, minimal technology. By our standards, they seemed to almost have none, or perhaps just kinds that were hard for us to see and understand. Ultimately, in general, the way they lived made very little sense to us. In spite of this apparent lacking of technology and scientific practices, they appeared to be very high-functioning, both intellectually, societally, and politically. We felt and saw it, but couldn't really understand it. They were human-like, clearly possessing some similar form of consciousness and intelligence, but they seemed to live in an almost perfect harmony with each other and the planet, like one massive symphony, endlessly playing a tune of bliss, and any missed notes or problems were glossed over and barely noticed. They lived with an unequivocal serenity within this, functioning on a smooth, confident intuition, as if they had a perfect understanding of everything. They also all seemed to constantly possess a childlike innocence and joy, regardless of their age or anything else. I can't even really properly translate it. Rationally, intellectually, it was almost incomprehensible. We had so many questions for them. Of course, in order to ask anything, we needed to be able to talk with each other. And so, over the course of the following weeks, I worked with my team to decipher and translate their language to the best of our abilities. The species didn't talk a lot, at least compared to us, but their language was still relatively clear and consistent, and we deemed it to be translatable. Eventually, after sufficiently learning their language, I became the first person to ever successfully talk with a living thing that wasn't a person. I started simple, demonstrating my ability to tentatively understand their language system, terminology, and vocal tones. The language was strange. It lacked a large, essential portion of what existed in all modern human languages, words that would translate even loosely into subordinate conjunctions like whether, if, and since. But most significantly, their language lacked all question phrases. We discovered this when I began trying to ask them questions, but couldn't find the words, phrasings, or tones in their language to allow me to do so. And furthermore, when I gestured at an item or a task or a ritual in a manner that I hoped might imply an unawareness or confusion, they only stated or repeated the term or sound or action used to represent it, as if there was nothing more to know. They seemed to entirely lack the sense or capacity or interest in questioning things. Now, with the solid basis of communication, my team and I redirected our efforts towards teaching the species the English language. By now, several additional team members, mostly linguists and language teachers, had begun periodically joining me on excursions and meetings with the species. A part of the protocol of the mission required, in such a scenario, that we either obtain permission or sufficiently demonstrate a lack of consciousness in the planet's species in order to move forward with building a base on their planet. They were clearly not unconscious, so that was out, but in order to ask them questions and get their permission, we first had to teach them what questions were. Slowly but surely, we taught them. We taught them what I meant when I asked who they were, what they liked, what they wanted, why they did this or that, and so on. It was an incredibly slow and surreal process, like teaching fundamental infant-level concepts to a fully intelligent, well-functioning adult. But even after some of the species began to successfully learn the English language and understand the concept of a question, for a long time, they still didn't seem to understand what an answer might be, or perhaps more accurately, why an answer might be. That part simply didn't make sense to them. Things just were. There was no relevant knowledge to be had underneath things or beyond things. Everything was, and what was to be known was already known, through experience, through intuition. In an effort to help this process along and further showcase who we were and what we could offer them, I brought various forms of our technologies onto the planet, examples of our sciences, our philosophies, our logic, and our knowledge. I showed them, I taught them. Eventually, after a long, difficult effort, their understanding of questioning and answering began to form. They first started by answering questions with questions. Why do we need questions? Was, I believe, the first question one of them asked. It was then that I knew we had finally bridged the last large gap. Now that they began to better understand, again, I began asking them things like what this item was and what that item did. I asked them why they got up in the middle of the night and sang songs. I asked them what they called themselves and what they called their planet. I asked them more abstract things as well, like how they were so happy all the time and what they thought happiness was. I asked them how they loved so openly and unconditionally and what they thought love was. I asked them about their culture and politics and how it worked, why it worked. I asked them what they thought the meaning of life was, what they considered their purpose, how they viewed and explained aspects of nature and the universe. I asked them about their sciences and technologies and philosophies and religions, or more accurately, what appeared to be the lack thereof. They still didn't really understand these sorts of questions, They essentially explained to me that happiness was happiness, love was love, life was life. And when I prodded further, they had nothing more. They seemed to not possess any real knowledge or understanding of things. They seemed to not know nor care of the truth. As more time passed though, and as we began to build an entire base on the planet, now with their permission, they slowly started wondering what these things were. The questions I asked them seemed to grow inside their head, spreading out across their entire being, individually and collectively. They began to wonder what made them happy and how they could be happier. They questioned why they loved, who they loved, and what love was made of. They evaluated how their social systems worked, if they even really did, and how they could improve them. They pondered why they existed and what the point was. They didn't have the answers anymore. Now they had the questions. Soon, I observed what I can only describe as the fall of their nearly utopian, heavenly civilization. They started denying and arguing over what was what. They began making things up and lying to each other. Some appeared to become hostile, corrupt, and deceptive. Eventually, they began asking what we were doing there, what we wanted, who we were. They questioned if we were good for them. They doubted us. They doubted me. They doubted themselves. Fairly quickly, we had to abandon the mission and retreat. Back to the space station we went, never to return. We have monitored the planet ever since. The species has continued to rapidly develop technologically and intellectually, building off what we left them. They engage in regular wars now, as well as other forms of conflicts and disruptions. The planet is no longer inhabitable by us unless we wish to fight with the species, unless we are willing to destroy them. In the end, we failed the mission. They did not attack us, we did not attack them. We did not pass along any diseases, but we infected them nonetheless. It has been many years and many planets since that encounter. We have not met anyone else since, nor returned. But I, personally, always return to the memory of that planet, of that species. Specifically, I always find myself pondering with great intensity an idea that I have not been able to shake ever since that mission. One essential question that I found at the bottom of everything, of all questions. Did that species know the truth of things more or less before we arrived and thought we taught it to them? Have they gotten closer to truth through their newly developed capacity and implementation of questioning and reasoning, science and technology, or were they closer to the truth before? Is the knowledge of nature, of love, of happiness, of life, closer or further to the truth of any of these things? The species had not questioned what happiness was, and yet they were blissfully happy. They had not questioned what love was, and they loved boundlessly. They had not questioned the point of life, and they lived with great purpose. They did not understand how nature worked, and yet they lived naturally and fluidly. Now, they possess the knowledge, the reason, and the technology to dissect and understand all of these things, to so-called improve all of these things, and yet, now they struggle with them. That species was living life. Now they, like us, work to deconstruct and understand it, to define it. They work to take all the pieces of the working system apart in order to see how it all goes together. But now they, like us, are left with the mess of all the parts and the unbelievable challenge of successfully putting them back together again. This video was sponsored by Blinkist. As information becomes more abundant and accessible, with so much to choose from, the psychological weight we put on investing large amounts of time into full books can feel increasingly heavy and hard to manage. The book summary service Blinkist helps counteract and reduce this weight by making it much easier to both engage in larger numbers of books in smaller amounts of time, as well as help you more effectively sift through and discover high-quality authors, topics, and complete books that you're potentially interested in reading prior to having to read the full versions first. By condensing thousands of nonfiction books into around 15-minute summaries, Blinkist helps you do all of this by providing the most important ideas and key takeaways of complete books in a convenient amount of time. If you're interested in topics related to evolution and the milestones of conscious and technological development within human history, Blinkist has some great titles, including Cosmos Sapiens by John Hands, The Upright Thinkers by Leonard Mlodina, as well as many others. And now, for topics, books, and authors that you find you are more interested in, you can explore further by using Blinkist's podcast summary shortcasts or purchasing the complete audiobook versions of certain book titles directly within the app as well. The first 100 people to use the link in the description will receive 1 free week of unlimited access as well as 25% off a premium membership. The free 7-day trial can be canceled at any time within the trial period. And of course, thank you so much for watching in general, and see you next video.